this video we're going to make a wooden box like this one. We're going to start with a piece of spalted sycamore that's 3 inches by 3 inches by 6 inches long. Here I have the blank that I'm going to make the box out of, and I'm going to set a spur center in the center of one end, tapping it with a rubber mallet. I'm going to bring up the tailstock, secure it. Bring up the tool rest and make sure that the wood clears the tool rest as it spins. And I want to set the height of the tool rest to be cutting at about center. I'm going to use a spindle roughing gouge, and I'm going to go back and forth and take off a little bit of the corners at a time. You don't have to do this process quickly. It's a matter of getting the piece to be round. And if you take off a little at a time, the whole process goes a lot smoother. And I'll turn it off occasionally to check to see if there's any flat spots still on there. Move the tool rest in closer and continue the process of making it round. Sometimes if you lay the tool on top of the spinning piece, if there's still a flat spot, it will bounce and you can feel it or hear it in the tool. So if that happens, you can turn it off, see where it is, see how deep or much deeper you have to go, and continue making it round. I'm leaving this in real time so you get some idea how long it takes to make a blank round. Seems smooth. Next, I'm going to put tenons on the side, on each end of the blank, but I have to know how large they're going to be. So if I get the chuck and a caliper, I can measure the outside diameter of the chuck, and that will give me about the size tenon that I want. And if I lay that up there, I can see about how much wood I'm going to have to remove when I cut the tenon. So now I'm going to use a square scraper, or in this case an easy wood tool, to push it straight in and cut a tenon. That's approximately 3/16 of an inch deep, and the size that I measured with my caliper. I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. If the billet's not square, first thing, just run the tool straight in to square it up, and then start cutting the tenon. The chuck I'm using is a dovetail jaw, so I've got a scraper that's set to the same angle as a dovetail, and I can use that to shape the tenon, and I'll do that on both sides. When I'm happy that the tenons are the right size, I can remove the blank from between centers, remove the spur drive, and put the chuck on the lathe. I have to decide which end is going to be the top or the bottom. I guess I'll make this side the bottom. Bring up the tailstock. And I'm going to part off what's going to be the top from the bottom. And I look about thirds. The top takes up about a third of the way from the edge of the billet to the bottom. So I made a pencil line just to give me a guide to where I'm going to cut. Using a parting tool, I'm going to make a cut in to the depth that I want the sides to be. In other words, to the thickness that I want the side of the box to be. And I'm going to make 3 parallel cuts, the width of the parting tool, determine how long the lip that's going to be on the top of the box to fit into the bottom, and then I'm going to cut the bottom away from the top, leaving just a little bit of a line from where the parting tool was. That will give me a measure of where the top needs to fit. Now I'm ready to shape the outside of the bottom of the box. I'm going to put a slight taper on this box, or a slight rounded taper from the top edge to the bottom. And I'm using a bowl gouge here to do that. Running it from the top edge to the bottom and putting a slight taper on the bottom of the box. When I'm happy with that, I can start hollowing the box. I want to be mindful of that little ridge that I left when I parted the box off, because that's where the top is going to fit into the bottom. First I'm going to drill a hole that will go and define where the bottom of the box is. And I've got a drill bit in a vice grip that I can put into the middle of the box using the tool rest as a support and push it down to the measured depth, the depth that I measured with that piece of blue masking tape. So that hole defines the bottom of the box. Now using I'm using here an Easy Wood carbide bit, square bit. I'm going to cut right at center, and I'm going to start at where the hole is and take little cuts coming in about 1/4 of an inch at a time and moving over from the center to the edge of the box. I'm going to stop cutting on the edge when I reach that little tab that I left when I parted off the top of the box. I want to real carefully cut that away as the last part of hollowing the bottom of the box. I'll test the top to see if it fits. Doesn't quite fit yet, so I'll take off just a tad more. Just a little bit makes a great big difference in terms of how the top fits. So I'll remove just a hair more wood along that lip. And the top fits on there snugly. It stays on there, and that's what I want. Now I can continue hollowing the rest of the box, and I'll leave that portion at the very top where I just fitted the top. I'll leave that alone. I'm going to skip ahead here a bit so you don't have to watch me hollow the whole box. But you do this in small stages, just a little cuts at a time. Don't try to make cuts all the way to the bottom at the start. Working from the center out and the edge back in. Just keep taking out all the wood that's not a box. Now I'm going to start sanding the inside of my box, and I'm going to start with a larger grit paper, like 120 grit paper. Turn the lathe down to a slower speed and sand the outside a little bit. But I'm going to be sanding the outside later too, so that's not too important. What's important is getting the inside sanded, because I won't have a way of coming back to that easily. So use a larger grit, and then move to a finer grit. I'll go to from 120 to 150. I'll go to 180, 240. It helps if you prepare your sandpaper ahead of time so that you know where all your grits are. And I'll stop at 320. When you're sanding, be sure to get the tool rest out of the way so that you don't get your hand or fingers caught between the tool rest and the spinning object. stay away from that spot where the top is going to fit into the box. We don't want to make that larger. Trim up or sand off the edge of the box so it's smooth and square. And before removing the box from the bottom of the box from the chuck, I'm making a mark on the box itself as to where the number 1 jaw in the chuck is. This will allow me to put it back in the chuck in the same spot later so that it lines up with the chuck. And now I'm going to hollow the inside of the top. I'm going to start by drilling a depth hole like I did in the bottom. Cutting from the inside out, try to shear off the end grain orientation so I get the smoothest cut coming out from the center. Now I want to leave the lip of the top about the same thickness as the wall thickness of the outside of the box. I'll go through my sanding routine again, starting with a coarsest grit. This is about the only time you'll get to sand the interior of the box lid, so it should be done now. I'm going to remount the bottom using my mark that I put on there when I took it off to line it up with jaw number 1. I'll give the lathe a spin to make sure it's turning square. Line up the top and bring up the tail rest to support it while I shape the top. Using a bowl gouge, I'm going to cut downhill. That is, I'm trying to shear the grain, going the direction that shears the grain rather than cuts into it. Cut away the tenon and leave a little nub on top where I plan to put my finial. Now the top's a little loose, but I can secure it with some masking tape. Leave a little notch for my drill to center in. First I'll sand the outside. Going through the grits. Tape it again to hold the top while I drill a hole for the finial. This time I'm going to use a chuck with a Morris taper on it so that I can get a nice clean hole in the center for the finial. I wasn't too concerned about that when I was just doing the depth. Now I can reverse, take the top, done with the top and the bottom. I'm going to take the tenon off the bottom of the box by reverse chucking it, and I left a little lip about 1/4 of an inch in of the box so that I could square the box against the chuck jaws. But this is not a very secure chucking situation, so in order to turn it, I'm going to put the live center back in the tailstock and bring it up to support the bottom while I turn the tenon off. I'll leave the tailstock up there as long as I can. I'll cut that tenon down to the smallest possible nub with a parting tool. Smooth out the rough grain with the gouge. And I'll finish off the bottom with the gouge, making as clean a cut as I can. And back to sanding. Remove the tool rest so you don't catch your fingers. About it. I'm about out of time on my video. So there's the box, and the final step will be to add the finish and put on a finish.